Popular books, whether old or new, that have been turned to movies seem to be a trend in today's society. Renowned books such as The Great Gatsby, The Book Thief, The Hunger Games, 12 Years a Slave, and many more have been ruined for the people that then watch the movie. And it also ruins the opportunity for people who have never read the book to read it. Movie producers change many things, including the thematic structure, order of events, and important messages and concepts when turning a novel into a film. For example, the Hunger Games movie. The movie started from chapter 3, then back to chapter 1, so it was really hard for the reader to put things together. When reading a book, people are able to create their own image of characters and allow the figurative language, style, and textual imagery to invoke mental films in their minds. But movies, movies can take this pleasure away from reading. For decades, readers repeated the same phrase when Hollywood adapted a beloved novel for the screen. The book is better than the movie. The line became a critical reflex in reaction to one mediocre screen version after the other. From old adaptations like Total Recall to more recent ones like I Am Legend, The Golden Compass, or The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Hollywood kept making the same mistake. They trim location to save money, cut characters to save time, and often, really often, misunderstood the emotional core of the source material. So, in today's presentation, I will talk more about this topic. So, stay tuned. Good evening, everyone. Today, I'll be presenting my second task, which is an oral presentation for the TSLB 3023 course. This job needs us to look at a 1,000 word persuasive text and analyze the material that has been selected. Why are books better than movies? By Daniel Becker is the persuasive article that I have chosen. So, first of all, I would like to say that I really like this article since we often see how people all over the world dispute about which one is the finest. They would ask questions like, should they see the movies or read the books first? And some may argue that movies are the best because they save time, while others may argue that books are superior since you can experience everything via your imagination. In late 2019, Daniel Becker, a traveler who enjoys sharing his experiences on his trips to magical places, finally decided to publish an article titled Why Are Books Better Than Movies? He employs many persuasive strategies in this one article, one of which is storytelling. Humans tend to understand things better through stories. Think of how we teach kids the important shared values through time-tested fables like Peter and the Wolf. Whether through personal anecdotes or reference to third-person experiences, stories help climb down the ladder of abstraction and reach the reader on a human level. Daniel Becker, who is the author of this article, opens his persuasive text with an anecdote involving his personal experiences to support his statements on how are books better than movies. By discussing his experiences, Becker able to chastise readers without getting them offside because getting he is merely agreeing with someone else's critique in this article. Furthermore, he also uses inclusive language to get a reader on side. So for those who don't know what inclusive language is the use of the words like we, us, and our In this article, he uses the word our to make the reader believe that the idea that he tries to convey is their idea too. Okay, here are the example that I get from the article about the uses of inclusive language. So the first one is our mind and imagination are powerful. And the second one is as our mind is such a fascinating thing, and that is that's all of these are the example of inclusive language that he used to make the reader to understand more what he tried to convey. Next, let's talk about the purpose of this persuasive article. So based on the title, we can see the purpose clearly, which is to persuade people all around the globe that it is much better to read books than watch movies they are based on. In this article, he shared his point of view and his experience on why books are better than movies. For instance, he starts the article with his own experience, where he said, I'm sure you have uttered the phrase, the book was better than the movie after seeing a film based on a book. I know I have said it before. In fact, I have said it so many times, I don't even bother saying it anymore. By Daniel Becker. He, um, Daniel Becker, also pointed out two main reasons why books are better than movies. The first one is time. For example, book timelines and the physical length of time of a movie. And the second one is our imagination. Now, we are going to talk about the target audience. Back again to the purpose of this article. The purpose of this article was to persuade people on how it is better to read the books than watch the movies they are based on. The question is, who are the target audience for this article? If we analyze the title of this article, we can see two main things, which are books and movies. So when we talk about these two, of course, it relates to the reader and the movie viewers. We can say that these two are the main target for this article because he tried to persuade them to read the book first instead of watching. So, before we talk about the main points and the supporting details of this article by Daniel Becker, we are going to talk about the style and the tone of this article first. So, the first one is style. The style of our writing is really important because based on our writing style, we can change someone's perspective on the topic that being discussed. It is just like the nuts and bolts of language, where our writing style is the nuts and the topic that being discussed is the bolts. In this article, the writer uses easy to understand words so he can convey the messages effectively through his article. For example, when you read a book, you might take a day, a week, a month, 2 months, or several months to finish it. You read at your own pace and in your own time. As you can see, these sentences mean people can have their own pace when it comes to reading. And from these sentences, we can see how easy it is to understand the word that he chooses to use for this article. On the other hand, tone is less technical than style. Tone in writing is not really any different than the tone of our voice. You know that sometimes it is not what you say, but how you say it. It is the same with writing. Every adjective and adverb you use, your sentence structure, and the imagery you use will show your tone. The definition of tone in literature is the way author expresses his attitude through his writing. The tone can change very quickly or may remain the same throughout the story. And tone is expressed by your use of syntax, point of view, and the level of formality in writing. For example, um, logical, neutral, informed, passionate, and witty. As for this article, the author, Daniel Becker, uses casual tones to convey his messages to the reader that who read his article. This is the example of the tone that I have taken from the article. Okay. For example, if you have never read them, I can give you some context as to why the movies will never be better than the books. The timeline of the trilogy spans decades, over 100 years in fact. Often, Tolkien will give great detail as to what each character is thinking, doing, and saying, often delving into the history of why the character is doing that. How can you do this in a movie? This is the example from the article that I chose. The author's writing style demonstrates the casualness of the text. So following that, I will go over the key points of this article as well as the supporting details. The author has provided 5 points. Let's take a closer look at each point. Okay, next we are going to talk about the main points and the supporting details. So let's take a closer look at each point. So the first one is books are better than movies because of limited times. The second one is books can span decades in great detail, but movies cannot. The third one is personal details are often missed in movies. Next is books are better than movies because of your imagination. And lastly, books are utterly personal to you. The first main point is books are better than movies because of limited times. Okay, as all of us already know, there are one big difference between books and movies, which is the time span. According to the author, when you watch the movies at the cinema, you need to sit there for at least 2 to 3 hours without a pause button. I'm sure all of us has gone through all this experience, right? Only now we cannot because of the pandemic. So that's where we can go through all this stuff again when the pandemic is gone. Okay? Okay, let's continue. But when you read a book, you can choose anytime you want to finish it, which means you can choose to read the books at lunch or while you're having a break. And by having this opportunity, we can take one day, months, and years to finish it. I have one friend who actually take a year and a half, if I'm not mistaken. He reads, he take that long to read what this one particular book. Okay, let's continue again. So this is one of the advantages of why books are better because when we are too busy with works, we don't really have time to sit down and watch the movies, but we do have time to read the books for at least 5 to 10 minutes. Moreover, in this point, the author questioned the reader, why does this thing matter? The author answered, due to the limited time frames of your average movie and due to our own limited attention span, the filmmaker literally doesn't have enough time to put everything from the book into the movie. This will naturally make the book seem better. A book has got everything in it. The movie does not. The next point, which is the second point, is on how books can span decades in great detail, but movies cannot. Books can span decades in great detail, especially in fantasy books. When you read a fantasy book, you will let your imagination running wild. Let's look at the example of an epic book and an epic movie, or rather a series of movie. J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings. I'm pretty sure that everyone here knows this movie. Okay, as you already know, this is a trilogy of books that sprouted a trilogy of movies directed by Peter Jackson. If you have never read them, I can give you some context as to why the movies will never be better than the books. So the first one is the timeline of the trilogies, because the timeline of the trilogy spans decades, over 100 years in fact. Tolkien, which is the author of The Lord of the Rings, often gives great details in his writing, such as what is the character is thinking, what is the character is doing and saying. He also often delving into the history of why the character why is the character is doing that and what kind of behavior is that. The question now is, how can the movie producer did all of this I'm sorry. The question now is, how can the movie producer do all of this in a movie? How can they represent every event, thought, and happening in a 3-hour movie? The answer is no, they cannot. A lot of scenes, character will get left out, and this, I can guarantee all of you that this will upset some people. Hence, the books are better than movies. The third point is personal details are often missed in movies. These points actually relate to the previous point, because if the movie producer cannot represent every single event in the books, people will complain that certain characters or events from a book aren't in the movie. This upsets them because that missing part might have had a special reasons with them. If it's not there, it feels like something that personally connects them in the book is missing. Ergo, the movie isn't complete, which makes the book feel better. I also include one example here from Harry Potter movie and books, because actually there's a big difference between these two. So I'm sure all of you can read it by yourself. I will let you read it. Now, let's continue to the fourth point. Let's go. This is the paragraph. Brian sat atop the wall he always sits on in the evening. It's an old, crumbling, and weathered wall, the kind of wall that has moss and the occasional small plant growing out of it. At this place, Brian has rested evening after evening, darting his eyes at passers-by and occasionally talking to them, but largely his attempts go unanswered. In return for their rude action, the passers-by receive a blank, unblinking stare. Okay, before we continue with the other paragraph, let's stop here first. So, what are you imagining? Do you see an old crazy man sitting on a wall who people ignore? Or maybe do you see a younger man who is happy and trying to be chirpy to others? Or do you see an armed guard ordering people along? There might be too little information at this stage, but already your mind is picturing something which is largely based on your own experiences. So now let's continue reading the story again, shall we? As Brian said, a new person approached, and once again he initiated communication. There was a pleading in Brian's voice this time, the type of tone that pricks your ears and drags you out of your daydreams and commands attention. The person stopped, smiled, and looked at Brian. Then he slowly reached out with his hand towards Brian's unwavering stare. As the stranger moved his hand closer to Brian, he was greeted with a motionless body and gaze, as if he was ready to lash out in self-defense. The man hesitated, seeming to question his own actions, but then continued and gently rested his head hand on Brian's head. He moved his head, he moved his hand back along Brian's body, and Brian arched his back up with a smile. The stranger said, "Hang on, old boy, I'll find you some food." So, what do you think about this whole paragraph? So, that story has a rather silly twist. Brian is a cat, and it's not from a book. It's actually by the author, who is Daniel Becker. Daniel Becker. He made this whole paragraph up, but that's not the point here. There are still a lot of things to imagine in your head as you read. Who or what is Brian? Why are people ignoring him? What is Brian doing? What's the wall like? The bricks, the plants, sounds, brightness, and atmosphere like? Everything. You will try to imagine all of these things using your head. And lastly, the last point in this article on how are books better than movies, which is books are utterly personal to you. Do you guys agree with this? Because I agree. What does the author mean by this point? What he's trying to convey is you are the person who filling in the detail. You are the person who making the world, and often it's based around your own experiences. So basically, you are the author of your own world. When you watch a movie, the director is dictating what everything is like. For this reason, it's practically impossible for a movie to be as good as a book. Tolkien, who is the author of The Lord of the Rings, just now that we talk about, could spend thousands of words describing the epic scenery the fellowship was walking through. The level of detail is astounding. from the peaks of the mountains to the drips of the water from the leaves. Literally pages and pages of it. It is a wonderland for your imagination, our imagination. And a movie just cannot create what your own mind can come up with. So, read the books first. Don't watch the movie first. Sadly, we appear to be nearing the end, so I believe now is the appropriate moment to discuss the author's stance. We can see from this article that he prefers to read books rather than see the movies, on which they are best as they provide greater benefits. According to Daniel Grecker, who is the author of this article, each person has a somewhat different mental representation of all the different components of the book. This kind of creativity that we have in our heads causes reading books to be the best. Lastly, to close this session, I would want to advise all of you to read the books first. Remember, read the books first before you watch the movie they are based on. Since your mind can accomplish anything you desire, you can choose your character's appearance and the type of universe you wish to build, depending on how the author writes their books and other factors. If you see the movie first, you will restrict your mind's ability to think deeper and more creatively. Finally, to conclude all of this session, always, always read the books before watching the movie. So before we end this session, this is the sources of this article. So that's all for me for today's presentation. So thank you for listening throughout this session. Thank you.